Welcome to our Thursday at 3 session hosted by the Center for Student Involvement at Kansas State University. This leadership series features a variety of workshops throughout the semester to talk about leadership development, student organization management, and overall just student involvement opportunities and topics. And today we're going to talk about how we can make a real difference by taking action to create change. So today we are joined by Patrick Grayshaw of Oklahoma State University, who has a decade of experience with community engagement and higher education and student affairs. Patrick is dedicated to building connections between college students and local community partners to advance systemic change efforts in addressing social issues. So with that, please help me welcome Patrick to speak with us today about making a difference.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you today because I think we're at a very critical time where there's lots of challenges that we face, and we're all trying to figure out what we're going to do next and how we're going to really make a difference and leave a lasting legacy. And so today, we're going to talk a little bit about wicked problems. What are these challenges that we face on a daily basis? We're going to talk a little bit about problem solving and how we come together and problem solve. We'll do a little bit of examining service and think about what types of service you have done previously, and then think about how we can increase our impact and how you can grow and develop what you do in the community, on campus, and so forth. So wicked problems. We have this idea of wicked problems, and they're a social problem that's difficult or impossible to solve. And you can think just for a second, what are the most challenging issues that we face on a daily basis, whether that's campus or whether that's throughout the nation. And so you can think about things such as poverty, student success. We have climate change, even things around the coronavirus or racism. These are all challenges that are wicked, and they're layered. And so we have these aspects about them that make them really challenging and difficult to solve. And that is why this is so important to talk about, because it's not just a simple solution. We can't just have one way to accomplish our goals to address these problems. And so I ask you, do you sometimes feel stuck? And this is a quote. I went on an alternative spring break trip to New Orleans one time. And on this alternative spring break trip, we were discussing low-income housing. And we're working in the lower Ninth Ward, and we're working in the center and the heart of New Orleans. And while we're there, we're seeing different approaches to getting people back into housing, and especially for low-income individuals. And the lower Ninth Ward had this process that was very community-based. They were working with owners, they were talking to people, and they were building a house at a time. And it was slow. And I've been going to New Orleans for 10 years at this point. And over the 10 years, not much changed. I mean, when you think about what happened with Hurricane Katrina, long time ago, and things did not change in the lower Ninth Ward, but people were very happy with the progress that was happening. On the other hand, there was a place that was built, beautiful townhouses. They had a school, they were building a grocery store to be connected, and they built this all and were able to accomplish this in less than 2 years. And so you have to say, which one's better? Well, the townhouses have challenges too of who could live there and whether there was enough housing and so forth. And so the student really captures sometimes how we feel stuck, which is you have these endless questions. Why is the world the way it is? And we don't have ways to permanently fix the problems. And so we can reflect and start thinking about how we can accomplish stuff and move past the why. And so you may have volunteered for years, just like the student says, and never thought about kind of the service and the nonprofit world and the complicated nature of that. And so if you're feeling stuck, this is a kind of a roadmap of how we can move forward. And as I said, we don't have easy answers. And so here's a good example with racism. Very important topic to be talking about, but we can see that racism is not completely solved. We've been trying to address this for decades, if not longer, depending on how you define racism. It's not something that's going to be gone tomorrow, unfortunately. We have unique problems. There's no single issue of racism. We have things like discrimination and microaggressions and cultural appropriation and xenophobia. And all these have different definitions. And so we have to think of, what does racism mean? Does it mean microaggressions? Does it mean something bigger? These things are also interconnected. And so we know our national attitudes affect our campus attitudes, and the community attitudes affect things. And so we can't just separate out one experience. We have to think about the broader context. We also have conflicting agendas. Even people who all want to address racism. You get a group of people, 20 people that say, I want racism to end. Some will really want unity. Others are going to want justice and say we need to fix the wrongs. If you think about equality and equity, equity really gives everyone the equal chance, while equality gives everyone the same amount of things. And there are two different ways to approach it, and people will not agree on those things. And so we have these conflicting agendas, and we have to figure out how we're going to rectify that. And the organizational challenges that we use to address them is very layered. One example that I have was, I was working on a campus, and there was a policy that if you held an evening event, you had to have police presence. And it was just for the safety of the campus and so forth. And so you had to have campus safety there. Well, our historically Black fraternities and sororities were holding evening socials on campus, and there's police officers there. And the perception is that they're being policed while other events are not being policed. And it wasn't meant to police the historically Black fraternities and sororities social events, but yet it's a systemic issue. It's a challenge that you have to now address. So how do you change that policy, and how do you accommodate things? And the result through a lot of conversations was that they would still have security, but the social organizers were able to choose which officers were going to be there, and the officers were in plain clothing. So there wasn't this perception of being policed. And that was an agreement that everyone was able to agree upon. Racism is a good example of something that's connected to other problems. So we have feelings of inclusion, we have academic success, we have all these other issues that are sometimes tied together. And we see this with any issue. There's poverty that's interwoven with hunger and homelessness and just working issues and education and so forth. And so all these things get really connected together. Every solution that we have when we talk about a wicked problem has ramifications. And so we might say we want free speech, but that can create conflict. But limiting speech fosters censorship. And so we have to say which one is the best way to go about this. We're not debating, or do we want to be racist or not? That would be a right or wrong. Instead, we're trying to say, what is the better way of going about this, or what is the worst way of going about this? And ultimately, it's hard to measure. And that is the one thing we're going to kind of circle back to at the end, which is, how do you measure the progress that you are doing as students to address whatever problem that you're wanting to address? So the rest of the time that I have with you, I'm going to talk to you about this idea of how we can create change. And the first part is listening. And then we have some dialogue. And then I'm going to spend a lot more time on how we deliberate, which is problem solve, and act, and how we actually do something that really makes a difference. So listening and dialogue are really the two foundational things. We have to listen to people. We have to share our emotions. We have to share our fears. We have to think about what concerns that we have, and those all need to be voiced. Those need to be put out into the world and shared, so that way we feel like we have done our due diligence and stepped up to the plate. And this can happen through dialogue, where we come together and we understand each other and we form common ground. A lot of you probably have experienced a dialogue about any issue. And I'm talking, we can go as micro as, what t-shirts are we going to make for the upcoming event? And everyone has an emotion, everyone has a fear, there's concerns and so forth, and you have a conversation, you dialogue. The, the challenge is going from that space of can we just come to some common ground and understand each other to how do we move forward? How do we actually make decisions and an action that is meaningful? So what is next? Well, we have to problem solve together. Deliberation is this idea that engages all individuals. And really the key thing is if you want to do something meaningful, you have to go beyond those in power. And so you have to really think about students from a broad range of backgrounds, and everyone needs to share their own experiences, share the facts that they're aware of and their backgrounds. And with a deliberative process, you want to have tough choices. These problems are not easy to solve. The public will get to articulate their thoughts on all the issues. So there's no bad decision on the table. Everyone gets to kind of explore what they're thinking. And ultimately, you have this democratic governance where the whole community gets to make decisions instead of just those in power. And so if you are leading a charge, if you want to shape things, you want to make a difference, you need to make sure that everyone that is affected by that issue is able to participate. And that is ultimately this inclusiveness and equality that represents the whole community. And so you need to make sure that when you think about who is there, you got to really think who is not there, and make sure those people are included. So what does this look like? I've been kind of just sharing this idea in a very abstract way. Well, this is a real example. And so there was a student at campus, and this is in Indiana, that wanted to create a community orchard. And so the student said, I really am passionate about community orchards. It's just like a community garden, but with trees. And I want to do something meaningful and build out this community orchard and really get people engaged. Well, the problems that were immediately identified is how should the food be distributed? Should it be given to the people most in need? Should it be given to the people who volunteer and help? Should it be given to those who can pay for it? Who's responsible to maintain this orchard? Is it the student's responsibility? Should it be the community's responsibility? And how are we going to raise money? So what they did was they did deliberation. They had structured meetings with community members and leaders. And so they brought together the student leaders, they brought together some campus leaders, city leaders, and community members. And they discussed, what are your concerns? Well, it turns out the one thing is that the community did not care how the food was to be distributed. That was not the top issue. The students thought that would be the issue. The community said, we don't care. That's not our biggest concern. We want to have a focus on having strong harvests, having fruit, and having just the options to give the food to anyone. There was also a lot of people that said, I have kids, and I want to make sure that my kids are able to participate in this process. And they don't know anything about how to manage an orchard or how to pick fruit or how to tell if a fruit is ripe. And so they wanted to develop these work and learn days to educate people on the process of growing fruit. They wanted to create a child-friendly program. And ultimately, they really worked hard at creating these hands-on experiences for community members. And so that was able to also get people involved in a non-participant way. In order to get people aware of the orchard that maybe won't go and work the orchard. And the other thing that they were concerned about is making sure that they brought together resources, because everyone had resources going forward, and they wanted to make sure that that was all included. So this process shaped a little bit how the orchard was going to look. It was going to look different because they were prioritizing something that the students did not think was the priority. And if you think about it, why would students on campus think about the children of these families? But they also thought that food distribution was going to be the biggest concern, and it wasn't. The process of bringing everyone together, though, has its own benefits. So people felt engaged, community members became more aware, and even some of the challenges in the community were shown. And so by bringing people together, you become much more aware of what's going on around you. And you just end up with this broad range of individuals and perspectives that really amplify people's experiences and amplify the work that is to be done. So ultimately, why does this matter? Why do we need to come together, have intentional conversations? Well, if you use this public deliberation idea and you bring everyone together into a joint decision-making process, people are going to feel heard and they're going to feel respected. And then afterwards, you have this great sense of how to do good in the community. You have better knowledge of political processes. And when I say political processes, everyone has their own political process. Every student organization has political processes. There are people leveraging for, to have their T-shirt accepted, as I mentioned earlier. And so you become aware of, why are people here? Why are people stepping up to the plate? Why are people not stepping up to the plate? You get people to come together and feel connected, and you end up with this networking of new individuals across differences that ultimately want the same thing. And then new individuals get to be part of this decision-making process. So the strategies in order to bring people together. The first thing is you have to have trust up front. So whatever you're trying to address, if you want to come up with a great climate change program, and you say, we really want to address climate change, you have to build trust. Every person that's coming to the organization needs to trust you, understand what's going on. And I cannot emphasize enough that relationships and forming those strong relationships are the most important part before you start running and hitting the ground running and doing some amazing work. You have to have diversity, and you have to really include everyone. Now, I don't mean include people that are going to be derailing your focus. If you have a commitment to climate change, don't bring in people who want to focus on something else. And so just know that you want to include everyone that is aligned with what you're doing, or at least understands what you're doing. And so think about the students that don't participate. I'm sure you have a friend that does not go to anything, does not attend anything, isn't part of any organizations. That person needs to be heard. You need to have this diverse participation. You need to have diversity racially, ethnically. You need to have multiple perspectives. You have multiple roles. And so if you're wanting to do something as a student, you need to make sure that you're including all different students. Are you including faculty, staff, community members, especially if you're wanting to address a social issue? If you're going to get off campus and you're going to do some service, you need to have some community members. You need to reach out to people, especially the naysayers, the people who are saying, I don't think you can do that. Reach out to them and say, I would like you to come and participate, and I want you to voice your concerns, because your concerns do matter. And maybe they'll learn that something is possible, and you'll learn some realities of what you can't do, because some people have been around and have done this before, and they say, I've already tried this before. The next thing is having dialogues. And I say facilitate. You have to have a process. You probably have all sat through meetings that have no organization, and you can have these open forums, and they're great to express emotion. I mentioned the purpose of bringing people together to share and to listen, and that's important. But then you need to have a clear process, because with a clear process, you have an end goal. You say, what are we developing at the end of this? What's our plan? And so you have this clear process, and you'll increase the likelihood of having these productive conversations. And so the conversations, instead of being derailed and very fluffy, they become very concrete. After these conversations, this is where we most often fail, is follow-up. So you can also probably think that you've had a conversation, you've sat in a group, and you've discussed things, and you are so energized, and everything's going great, and then nobody comes back. I remember years ago, I was working on some relief around the tornado that hit Joplin, Missouri. And we had 40, 50 people that would come to a meeting and say, I want to really help. I want to make a difference. This matters. And then the next meeting was maybe 30 people, and the next meeting was 20. And eventually we had 4 people that were interested in participating. And interest is going to wane. People are going to say, that's not really for me. But where we most often fail is not following up and having a plan to follow up. So you need to think through this whole process before you're even building trust. What are you going to do after you have a deliberative process and you come up with a solution? How is everyone going to stay included? Advertise everything you're doing, get the word out. How do you typically promote your events? Do more than that. Ultimately, you have to think greater. Why? Because the person that you just thought of earlier, that is, your friend that does not participate in anything, the advertisements are not working for them. And so you have to think, how do I reach that person? How do I convince that person that the cause that I believe in is something important to take as part of their mission as well? And then finally, you want to really focus on building relationships. Sometimes we don't accomplish big goals. And when at the end of this presentation, I'm going to talk about, we are not always successful. But the relationships we build can be beneficial for many other purposes and will help action ideas move forward. And the next time we want to step forward, we'll be able to build upon those relationships because we'll already have that trust. So now let's take action. So are you making a difference? So think about the last 10 things that you would say were volunteering or service or philanthropy, right? So do you think those activities made a difference? And you might be saying, yes, I 100% think those made a difference. And you might be thinking, gosh, I really don't think so. And so some people want to feed the homeless today. There's homeless out there, they're hungry, and we need to go feed them. Others want to give a safe place. They want to say people need to have a safe and warm place to live, and it needs to last longer than today. And so I'm going to, work on getting shelter set up and so forth. And others want to create a world where no one's homeless, that nothing we do creates a homeless person. And the important thing is that there are people who need to be fed today. There are people that need solutions that last longer than a day. And we also need people that are going to fix the system. And so every layer of this is important. When you think about how do we solve homelessness, if we were to have a conversation and deliberation about this, someone might say, we need to have a soup kitchen. We need to, have a food pantry. We need to, get food out to people who are hungry, or we need to provide shelter or so forth for, the homeless. And those are important viewpoints. And you might say that is our goal. That is a tangible way that we can move forward. And ultimately, you're going to be more successful in focusing on that than just kind of doing whatever comes to the surface. So what exactly are we doing? Well, there's a spectrum that we can see service on, and it goes from charity through social change. And so the time you dedicate towards the activity that you are engaging in, and the focus on the issue, what's the underlying issue? So if you're doing, let's say, invasive species removal, right? So you're going out into the nature and you're going to be removing the invasive species. And if you're going to spend a lot of time doing that, do you know why that's important? And a lot of times we might spend a lot of time doing it, but we're not aware of why is it important that invasive species are removed from our wildlife, our nature land. And so as that, both we focus more and we dedicate more time, we evolve into the social change. But this is not value driven. I don't want you to walk away from here thinking, I'm not doing social change, I'm worthless, because you're not. Back to my Joplin tornado example. After a tornado, people provide charity. People provide food, they provide shelter, they provide clothes, they provide money, and they go and they help people clean up their land. It's quick time. You go right out and you don't really think about what are the social factors that caused this tornado and why is their house built in the way that wasn't able to survive it, or why did this gym get destroyed or so forth. You're not really thinking through that because it's an immediate response, and charity is needed because those people who are affected by a tornado, they need support right away. But then we have projects which are probably where a lot of you exist, doing things where you're saying, I believe in this issue and I want to go do something meaningful. And so you're aware of what the challenges are and you're dedicating more time. And if you continue to grow that, you will end up doing social change. But really spending all of your time and really knowing the issue is a commitment. And so I want to be clear that not every person should be doing social change on every issue. It's not feasible, and we have to take care of ourselves too. And so we have people that fall in all of these different categories. And ultimately, if you really focus on where you are and be clear with yourself, you're able to articulate a really good, clear vision and be able to measure what you do better and maybe amplify it and make it a little bit stronger. So I want you to also think, what is the impact of your work? And there's two parts of this. There's the direct work and then what I call the ripples. So the direct work, how much money did you raise? You held a philanthropy event. How much money did you raise? Or how many people did you serve? So maybe you went to a nursing home and you did something. You said, okay, how many people did I just serve? Or what exactly did you accomplish? Did you pick up bags of trash, or did you paint something? Did you restore a fence? Those are all different examples of direct work. But then we have these ripples, these ongoing things that are lasting benefits. So you raised a bunch of money. What was that money? What's the ripple effect of that money? And so think about, I have some people who've really started memorial scholarship funds. And so they've raised $50,000, $100,000, and they're able to endow their scholarship money. And so there's $500 that goes out every year. And so there's a lasting benefit. Someone's going to receive that scholarship for the foreseeable future. And so you're going to think what's coming of that? Or if you raised money and it bought something specific, what does that item bring to the organization long term? How many people did you serve? Well, what did the people do next? So it may not be anything, and that's okay. So you may have served, people in a soup kitchen line. They felt full for that moment, and they went on. And maybe that's fine. Maybe you did something that really empowered people to step up and be able to make the changes that they want to do for themselves, for their organization, or so forth. And so you got to think what could be the ripples of that, and how can you maybe amplify that? And so is your work long lasting? You paint a mural. Does that mural stick around? Do people notice the mural? Does it inspire more murals? So maybe if you engaged a bunch of kids, at a local elementary school and building a mural around issues that they're passionate about, maybe you then end up empowering those kids to step forward in the future and really take ownership of their own passions and their projects. And so that can be a long-term ripple, and you have no clue what those ripples are. And that's why all this work is challenging. Going back to this idea of wicked problems, how do you measure the ripples? Well, ultimately, you really can't. There's ways you can try to get at some of these things, but what one person does affects another person and another person, and it can be very inconsequential, or it can be very consequential in the long term. So in order to think differently, what you should do is, usually you end up thinking, we want to do something good. I want to go do something good, and you search for a project, a cause to raise money for. You end up going and volunteering, you serve, and then you figure out what the impact you had and why does that matter. How should we plan instead? We should think about the issue that we want to address. So maybe we say, in this area of a community, accessibility is a challenge. And so we know that the buildings are old, and the accessible entrances are not available, or they're in the back of the building, they're just not present, and that's an issue. And so you have this issue. Well, how do you best address that issue? With the resources you have. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the deliberation. You pull people together. You get people who are affected by the fact that it's not an accessible entrance. They come to the table. You don't just plan without the people that are affected. You get the people who manage those buildings. And so maybe it's a company, maybe it's campus, right? You get the people that represent that. You get other students and community members that are passionate about the same issue, and everyone discusses those things. And what's going to happen is There's going to be someone who says, we need to build a ramp right in the front. And someone says, no, we can't do that. It doesn't fit. It'll be too steep or something like that. And someone says, okay, well, then we should do this instead. And someone says, well, we actually don't have the money. Well, then someone goes, I know where we can find the money. And then you start really working together as you're planning out your project. And so then you have a plan. You plan your service project, you plan your fundraiser, you do what you want to do. And then when you're evaluating the success, you evaluate it based on what you wanted to accomplish. So going back to that original issue, we want to make sure that people have accessible entrances. And we will evaluate that based on whether we accomplish that goal. And so instead of trying to make meaning of what you just did, you start with the end in mind. And you plan almost backwards in a way. You say, how do we get there? And you make sure the right people are at the table, and how can you get there as efficiently and effectively as possible. But remember, you are limited by your resources. So you might be really passionate about disability services all around. You want to make an inclusive, accessible world where no disability becomes a disability and everyone has access. Well, that's great, but what resources do you have today? What do you have to work with, and what can you accomplish? And when you bring more people together, you will have more resources and more ideas and more ways to accomplish things. So I leave you today with these 5 tips to start making a difference. And the first one is you want to include multiple voices. You want to make sure that everyone at the table represents a wide range of perspectives, because what you think is the best way to accomplish something isn't always the best way. Think about the orchard. Students were very smart. They said, this is important, that we need to make sure to think about how the food is distributed. Well, when you include multiple voices, you find out that that's not the most important issue. The most important issue is, how do you include children in the process? How do you engage families that don't know anything about farming or growing fruits? And so having these multiple voices, you want to have some conflict, not conflict of arguing or, disrupting the process. You want to have people who think differently than you and ultimately bring a new perspective. Solve problems together. Don't try to run forward. The biggest, I think, mistake that a lot of student organizations make is they say, okay, we want to make a difference. We'll appoint you to go make a difference and tell us what we're going to go do. And that person has to then go out and find something to do. And it's not together. It's not problem solving together. And ultimately, it's really not even solving a problem. And so you want to think, what is the problem we want to solve, and how can we address that together? Be clear about your impact. Know that you're not saving the world, but also, could you do something more impactful? Can you do something that raises the bar just a little bit more? And so make sure that you are clear about that and think through what you're measuring your success by. Don't oversell it, don't undersell it. And that'll allow you to communicate this shared vision. So get people on board, explain what your goals are, allow other people to participate in that goal. Your goals should be a moving target. As more people get on board, they might say, that is a really lofty goal. We want to accomplish something that's a step before that. And that's wonderful. Or they might say, we want to go even greater. And they get to participate in that. They get to own that vision as they move forward. And understand that we can't solve all of our problems. We're not going to be able to solve every problem. As I started the presentation, wicked problems are multifaceted. They take a lot of work, and you might only be able to address a sliver of what we're talking about. So whatever your wicked problem is, know that you're not solving it. But with every step along the way, we can bring people together, we can be intentional, we can have facilitated conversations that are geared towards the solution, that are communicating that shared vision, that have purpose, that we say, you're going to show up for this hour and we're going to accomplish something very specific. And then we go and we plan our project and we go accomplish what we want to do. And that is what we'll have accomplished. Not all of our problems, just some of them. And that will continue. And if we all did that, our problems will start to wither away. And I showed this iceberg as the icon. And there's a lot more than what we see in the iceberg, but slowly that iceberg melts. Hopefully not from climate change, but we want to erode at our problems and slowly take things away. So I appreciate your time and listening. And here's my contact information if anyone has any questions or wants to reach out. I would love to talk more about any way that I can support you problem solving.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Before we go, does anybody have any questions for Patrick that you'd like to ask now? Just checking. I do want to mention a couple different resources and programs here at K-State that really touch on, I think, some of the topics you mentioned, but also places you could go if you're viewing this and you're not already connected to some of these. So the first thing I want to mention is our student organizations here at K-State. We have almost 500 registered student organizations that focus on a lot of different topics. But you can actually browse those organizations by community service or special interest groups, or just find an organization here to get connected to, like Patrick said, to work together collectively to solve some of these problems as well. So student organizations is a great way to meet people who have that same vision, that same passion area, same interest as you. I also want to mention Hands on K-State and Alternative Breaks in the Staley School of Leadership Studies. Hands on K-State promotes civic learning and leadership through meaningful volunteer and service opportunities between campus and community. And Alternative Breaks is an opportunity for K-State students to participate in an intensive service experience during winter, spring, or weekend breaks. And they travel around to different sites in the Midwest where you can work with local residents to learn how communities are addressing pressing social issues. I will also throw out there the caveat that these are programs that are up and running, but with COVID-19, maybe travel is not happening right now. And I know some of these offices are also undergoing kind of a rethinking, reforming how they're operating. Two other ones I wanted to mention is that we do have a Center for Engagement and Community Development here at K-State and an Institute for Civic Discourse and Democracy, which some of you may be interested. If you're interested in this topic today, those might be other resources you'd like to reach out to here at K-State. But with that, I just want to thank you again, Patrick, so much for sharing this information and kind of leading us through how we can think about trying to get to that action step of addressing these challenges that we recognize that we face, like you said, that are important to us. And now we kind of have a plan, thanks to you, of how we can maybe address some of these things. So thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.